Hello and welcome to the PhD Life Raft podcast. I'm Emma Brzezinski and today I am talking to Rowena Murray. Rowena has a wealth of experience in helping academic writers, and today we're talking particularly about what Rowena calls the endgame of PhD writing as you're coming towards the close. So we talk about the shift from the focus on supervisor to focusing on examiners. We talk about how to identify your contribution to knowledge. And we also talk about the power of obsession. So I hope you enjoy the episode. Hello, Rowena.
Hi, Emma.
Thank you so much for being here. So I made contact with you because you have so much experience in the field of helping PhD students with their writing and interest in writing more generally, but particularly helping PhD students to focus down. And you suggested that we talk about the end game of the PhD, and being a theatre scholar, I love a Beckett reference. So yes, let's do end games. And we're going to get into that in a minute. But first of all, I always ask people about their own journey and their own experience of postgraduate study. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Certainly. Thank you for asking me to do this. It's always a pleasure. And if it helps, then that's great too. But my experience of graduate study was in the Pennsylvania State University, right in the middle of Pennsylvania, and I did my PhD in English. And as some of you will know, when you're doing a PhD in that system, you have a teaching assistantship. So I taught rhetoric and composition.
Amazing.
Which were two required courses for all the undergraduates. At the time, there was about 75,000 students, undergraduates, so they all had to do these two required courses. And I had to do 3 modules on the teaching of this course. So I did my teaching and learning in higher education. I did my seminars. You had to do candidacy exams, which was like a Viva within the first year. You then had each of your seminars was examined, so that's every 10 weeks you had an exam or a paper, and then you had comprehensive exams on all your coursework. So I managed to pack all that into 3 years. Amazing. And then got an international fellowship from the American Association of University Women to do the thesis part, and then of course you have a Viva, or they call it the oral defence, at the end of that. So it was really, really hard, but It was an excellent education, couldn't fault it. And it's a big sporting university, and as a volleyball player I was like, this is great. You could hold the Olympics at Penn State, and they had all this leisure facilities and everything. It was great. Enjoyed it very hard. Enjoyed it.
And then people are always interested in terms of how people got the job they're doing now. So can you tell us a little bit about then what next? How did you kind of make those steps along?
Well, the next step would be, after the fellowship finished, would be various pieces of part-time work. I mean, when I say a lot, I worked in all the universities in Glasgow, and I did evening classes as well, and I worked out in the community. I worked in community education. So I put together a lot of part-time jobs for about 2 years, which was really exhausting, but it was kind of like boot camp. I learned a lot about teaching different groups. And then I got a 1-year appointment as a research fellow at Glasgow University in the Scottish literature. And then that was renewed for another year. And then I started applying for full-time positions. I got offered a job in a college in Scotland. And while I was mulling that over, I went to one of my referees to thank him for writing this reference. And they offered me a job at Strathclyde University. So that was my first full-time job. But I think it was really the academic writing, just by the by. You know, I'd obviously worked in literature and languages and stuff, and I did tutoring and lecturing and that, but the academic writing became kind of my interest, and it became a job as well, you know, in supporting staff and students. And now it's not just about remedial support, it's about how do you achieve excellence in writing for different audiences, for example, with the REF, you know, with impact case studies. So there's been all sorts of ways in which being the writing expert in the room has created what my career now is, really.
Love that. I love that. And I think it's just so helpful to hear other people's stories, because I think there's a lot of anxiety about, I have to land a full-time job straight out of my PhD. And actually, it is very common that people kind of get a range of experience, and then that can help them make decisions about what it is they want to do next. And also a theme that keeps coming through, like for you, this writing passion and commitment to that particular area. Again, people find that a passion comes through that then becomes their life work.
Yeah, and I only avoided saying the word obsession there about my interest in academic writing. Just, I'm not saying that.
No, but I love obsession. Good enough for Calvin Klein. It's good enough for me. And I think that sense of absolutely committing to something, obsession in the best sense of the word, and kind of just being immersed in that. And it certainly communicates in your work, that sense of absolute immersion in this material. So let us get through it and pick your brains.
Okay.
So, as I say, you suggested this idea of the end game, and this kind of the last. Well, it ranges for different people, doesn't it? But notionally about the last 6 months of your PhD.
Yeah.
And you've given some particular. We had a little bit of communication ahead of time, and you've said some things that you thought people should be thinking about in terms of getting to that end point and the completion point. So do you want to let us your kind of your top points there in terms of what you...
Yeah, I can easily. I mean, I think it's really important, I think it really helps people to think about their thesis experience, the PhD experience, the thesis writing in that way, that at a certain point you turn a corner from I am working in this and it will be done eventually to, no, I need to shut this thing down. I need to finish it. I need to produce this 80,000 words or whatever it is. There is a university requirement. Yes. This is what I need to produce. And I need to now start looking at the writing I've done and the writing I've still to do in that way. And what I've done is develop specific writing activities that help people move into this endgame phase, what we're calling endgame, kind of before, what I've noticed is before they feel ready to, exactly.
Right.
I think if you wait till you feel ready, you'll be waiting a long time.
Yes.
So I think endgame, as you'll know, being a scholar of Beckett, and also if you play chess, people will know endgame means not all moves are available. So it's like certain things, like reading widely. No, and please don't repeat this. Rowena Murray said stop reading, but so at a certain point, you've got to stop doing certain things. Some of the moves of earlier in the thesis, you've got to stop doing them in order to get into this endgame phase. So that's why I've chosen this name, because I think the idea of not doing everything you've been doing so far is quite helpful in saying this is how dramatic a change it might feel like for people in the 6 to 12 months, the last 6 to 12 months of their thesis. And again, people have said, because I've now invented a course, an endgame course, which I've run 4 or 5 times in the last year. And people said, oh, I don't think I'm ready for that yet.
Yes.
Well, that's exactly the point.
Well, it is like divorcing your thesis, isn't it? It's kind of getting to a point where you're starting to close it down, and there's pain. It's painful. You often you think you're going to love that in terms of getting it finished, but actually it can be a very painful letting go process.
Yeah, I think there's that. But I think it's also maybe the hardest. I've been talking to a lot of people about this lately, saying this is my idea, the endgame course, blah, blah, blah. It seems really useful. And they're saying, yeah, it's really the hardest phase, because it's when you pull it all together and you have to make this coherent document. So it could be the hardest, even although I think that these activities that can make it straightforward, it's still quite hard brain work. Yeah.
But let's also just say too, it can be very, very. I'm worried that we're going to put people off. It can be that moment also, though, like you say, in terms of things coming together, that can be truly exciting to see things coming together.
Yes, and creative, because people know they have to write about the contribution, and some people are looking in their data for the contribution. I'm like, no, it's an active construction.
Yeah,
you actively construct the contribution, and that's quite creative. And you don't get it the first time, or maybe first few times you write about it, but that's a creative process, and it's maybe iterative, and that's maybe a bit wearying, but it is creative as well. And I think it is about making this last phase manageable by making it managed. I say a lot, you're going to say, here are the specific tasks for getting this done. And if I can jump to my first topic, it's a shift. So there's the end game, not all moves are available, is the first concept. The second is you're in the last 6 to 12 months. What is it you've got to do? How much have you written? How much have you still to do? So it's kind of taking stock. The next thing is acknowledge that this is another shift. It's another change in audience. And this is where you might want to talk to your supervisors, in the sense that you've been writing for the supervisors for many months and years, and that's fine. There's no problem with that. But now the audience really shifts to the examiners. Now, they're the ones we're really targeting with this endgame writing, if you like. We're trying to think of, how do we meet the criteria? I've already said the word contribution.
Yes.
That's probably a universal criterion for the doctorates. So it's about thinking about what the examiners need to see. They need to see a contribution argument, and maybe you need to have a conversation with your supervisors, who might say, no, I don't think you should do that, you should do this. You might say, well, no, I think at this point, maybe I, the author, the student, I want to emphasize this, and I think I've done enough of that. So there's a little bit of maybe a shift in the relationship as well, in that you want to get done. They want you to get finished as well, to be fair, the supervisors. But there's a little bit of, quite often, the supervisors become maybe a bit more directive, because they think I see how you can get this done. And at the same time, the student is going, yeah, but I don't think so. I want to do this, or I think I should do it this way. And that can be quite a change.
Yes,
and it's just good to be aware of that. It's not problematic unless you're not aware of it. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Emma.
No, I was just saying, it's a negotiation, isn't it? It can be tricky, but it can also be thrilling in terms of knowing this. Yes. I know what's right for my work now.
Yes. Yeah.
So there's that shift in audience.
Yes.
Thinking about your examiners, and then you're talking about contribution, and I think this is something people get very anxious about. Don't they? Kind of this originality, my contribution to knowledge. What does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, the contribution it has to be said, it is a word you must use. I don't use the word must very often, but you must use the word, or whatever version of that word is in your university's criteria for the doctoral award. So there will be criteria that will be written down on the examiner's report form, which, if you've never seen it, go and find it now. The examiner's report form is where the criteria are written down, and in the Viva, we look at these criteria. And if I'm chairing a Viva, I'll literally read them out, and they'll go, these are yes, no questions. The candidate has done this, yes, no, yes. Yeah, it's generally all yes, and then they have feedback for the revision. So look at the criteria. But the key one, as you've said, Emma, is quite right with the contribution. Now, what it means is, sometimes I think, well, you must use the word. Sometimes I think an easier question for you to think about this is, what do we know now that we didn't know before? As a result of your study, what do we know now that we didn't know before? And I think even thinking, or preferably talking and writing about that for a few minutes, is a way to construct this concept of new knowledge. Because what happens initially, even with that actually, what happens initially is people assert contribution. This thesis contributes to knowledge about blah, 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 and they don't define it. So they assert it, but they don't define it. And so as soon as you use the word contribution, define it. In what sense is this a contribution? And the answer is, in relation to previous work. This is a relational statement. It's not a contribution in a vacuum. So you have to say, okay, in relation to this work, that work, different authors. I've challenged, I've added to, but what have you added? People say I've shed new light, I've provided insights. What are the insights? So I'm just saying, people listening to this, you can leapfrog these stages of where you're just simply writing, I've added knowledge. Which knowledge have you added? What do we know now that we didn't know before? And the other key rabbit hole not to go down is, when I say it's a relational argument and you have to link your assertion of contribution to previous work, it's not a literature review. People then start writing hundreds and thousands of words of literature review. I'm like, no, it's the opposite of literature. It's all about you, but you link it to previous work in a specific way. So if you say you've added to Murray's work, Murray 2015, what did you add? If you say you challenged the Murray 2010, what's the challenge? You have to specify. Based on what you've done in your research, based on what you found.
Yes. No, so that is really, really clear. So it's this opportunity in a way to show off, to talk about what you've done, but like you say, absolutely contextualizing your work is really important to situate yourself in that community of scholars, isn't it?
Well, that's what contribution means. It's a contribution to what was there before.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've got shifting your audience, we've got defining the contribution that you're making. And then the other thing you said you were going to talk about, which I'm really interested here, in terms of this writing together, the benefits of writing together. And because you always imagine that people are kind of going to go into a room and disappear as they finish that last bit off, which can be very scary for people. So I'm really interested to hear about this writing together.
Well, I'm completely happy to appear to overstate this massively. The power of writing. The power of writing, the productivity and power and confidence building and stress management, anxiety reducing, the whole 9 yards. Writing in little groupings of people who choose to write that way. And I'm including online. I'm assuming now we're not all going and writing retreats in gorgeous Scotland. We're actually talking about writing together online. And the experience, I was going to say I think, but I know from what people tell me, and myself included, that writing together for 60 or 90-minute slots in a structured day, or maybe even you only have one of these slots. If you've got children, after they've gone to bed, you can write for 60 minutes or whatever. So defining writing slots is part of this writing together. The model I've developed, the structured writing retreat, as I say, it works just as well online, and it's working for interdisciplinary groups. It doesn't need to be people in your own discipline. Sometimes there are other conversations you have with them. Talk about your goals, set your writing goals, monitor the extent to which you've achieved them, listen to what other people are calling writing goals, learning to set realistic writing goals for the time we actually have. So that's what I mean by the benefits of writing together, for everything from relieving stress to feeling we're in the same boat to actually getting concrete, ideas about what a writing goal might involve, and the satisfaction, because in this high stakes writing that's called thesis writing, sorry, I'll just finish at one point. It's high stakes writing, and that's not going to change. You've been working at this for a long time. So the more you can kind of develop strategies for managing what can be quite stressful, the better. And it's all about the goals. It's having a writing goal, a specific writing goal for a specific time slot, be it 60 or 90 minutes. And, that might be 700 words, 1,500 words. People go, what? I don't know how many words I'll write in a number of minutes. It depends on, I'm like, let me stop you right there. Of course it depends, but decide. And that's the intellectual work of writing, is saying, okay, I've got a 90-minute slot. I think I'll be working on this idea of contribution. What we know now that we didn't know before as a result of my thesis or as a result of my research is complete that sentence and write about it. That would be a prompt for writing for 60 minutes, 30 minutes, not all day, and then stop after 60 or 90 minutes and look at what you've done. Set a word limit for that. Just say, okay, the contribution argument, what would that be at the end of your thesis? Is it going to be a page, 250 words, double space? Is it going to be a couple of pages? It depends how contested it is, how contestable. So you can see how setting some time limits and word limits prompts you to decide and make these important decisions rather than just, I'm going to sit down and do some writing. Well, what are you doing? Define it. Yeah.
Exactly, because to sit down and write your thesis it just feels so heavy and kind of impossible. How can you sit down to write it? And that sense of what you're saying there in terms of real clear focus is just golden advice. And I think also what you were saying in terms of being together with other people, and I think particularly at this moment where we are still in lockdown as we record this, actually making contact with real human beings who are also trying to navigate PhD study in a lockdown environment can be a real blessing. I know that from PhD students that I'm talking to just now, that actually that has been great. And we will, of course, have the links and things so that people can follow that up.
Magic. Thank you.
So much good advice in there, but I'm going to ask you an unkind question, which I ask everybody. In terms of a top tip, so something that people can take away and kind of fraction, and there's already lots in there. So you might just choose your favourite from what we've already covered, or there might be something else that you're going to pull out of the bag.
Well, I think, as we discussed earlier, the writing the 750-word thesis summary was the last item on my list. And I would say that's it. That's the top tip. Write a 750-word summary of your thesis. So that's 750 words divided by the number of your chapters. So that's a paragraph with, 100 words on each chapter. Each paragraph begins with the words, chapter 1, verb, provides the rationale for the study, blah, blah, blah. Chapter 2, reviews the literature on focusing on and shows that there was needed, work was needed on this. So it's chapter 1, verb, chapter 2, verb, chapter 3, verb, the doing word, without blinding you all with grammar. And it's a way, again, of forcing yourself to decide, well, what is each chapter doing? And then you need to look at your 750 words and go, okay, where's the macro argument? Not just that chapter 3 builds in chapter 2 or 4 and 3 or 5 and 4. What's the macro argument, the big argument that the whole thesis makes? And how is each of these chapters progressing that? And that's where the last sentence of each paragraph is important. The last sentence is like, well, so what? What did that show us? What did that tell us? Particularly for your discussion chapters or whatever they're called, the stuff that's about the half of it or 2/3 of the thesis is about your work and what you found, what you think it means. So the first sentence is chapter 1, verb, and the last sentence is, well, so what does that tell us? And those last sentences should show how the thesis argument develops. And the last thing I would say about this is aims and claims. The aims of the study were, so chapter 2, 3 reviews the literature on focusing on showing that there was a need for research on Therefore, this study focused on these 3 research questions. So the research questions are in the summary, and those questions should be answered at the end. And so the last paragraph should tell me what the answers to these questions were. So that's what I mean by aims or research aims. Should, word for word, the same words should be there in the aims as in the claims at the end. Aims at the start or at the end of the lit review chapter, if you've got one, and the claims in the conclusion. See what I mean? So it's getting that verbal word for word match. And I'm only spelling that out, emphasizing that, because quite often people feel that, or have learned that they should never repeat the same terms. I'm like, no, repetition is your friend. You have to actually use the same words in aims and claims or research questions and research answers. So this is one of the tasks in the endgame course. That is the first task, actually, that I run, as you know now, because it forces people to make decisions. And it means your supervisors can look at it 10 or 20 times and give you feedback. It takes them maybe a minute or two to read it, a minute or two to respond to you. Okay, maybe 5 minutes to write the email. And you can, as I say, send them, revise it. Please don't tell them I told them to read 20 versions of your thesis summary, or do blame me, say Rowena Murray suggested it. And then once you're happy with that, you know how to revise it. You may even know how to write the chapters you've not yet written, because you can see the whole thing. So you've constructed the whole thesis. And that then goes into the end of your introduction so that the examiners can see, to come back to them, the whole thesis and how coherent it is, because you've made it coherent. Ta-da!
I love it. Aims and claims. I love it. And this sense of the kind of the architecture of the thesis. It's really, really important. Thank you so much, Rowena. That is amazing. I think we all need a transcript of this episode so that we can make sure we're ticking things off as we do it. As I say, I will, in the show notes, we'll have some more information and we'll have all the links. Don't forget that you can sign up for the newsletter too, because we always put a bit of extra content in there every week. Thank you for your time, Rowena, and thank you all for listening.
Thank you for setting this up. You're very welcome, and good luck. Keep writing, everybody.